My cousin who flies private jets called me late at night. I need to confirm something, she said. Is your husband there with you? Yeah, I replied. He's in the kitchen making tea. She went silent. Strange. Because a man signing his name as your husband just boarded my jet to Dubai with a woman he called his wife. Then footsteps echoed behind me. Dane, I need to confirm something. My cousin Sienna's voice came through the phone, tight and strange. Is your husband there with you right now? I glanced toward the kitchen where Reese was making his nightly tea, the kettle whistling like it did every Thursday at 10:30. Yeah, he's in the kitchen. Why? The silence that followed made my skin crawl. That's impossible, she whispered. Because a man who looks exactly like him just boarded my private jet to Dubai. He signed the passenger manifest as Reese Chandler. He's sitting with a woman he called his wife. My brain stopped working. What are you talking about? He's 20 feet away from me right now. I'm looking at him, Dane. Same face. Same scar above his eyebrow. Same wedding ring. He's wearing that Tom Ford suit you picked up from the cleaners last week. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned slowly. Reese stood in the doorway, steam rising from his mug, asking if everything was okay. My husband was in two places at once. And one of them was a lie. I stared at him, at this man who looked exactly like the person I'd been married to for 7 years. The navy Yale sweatshirt with the frayed collar. The reading glasses pushed up into his dark hair. That small scar above his left eyebrow from a college lacrosse accident that he'd told me about on our third date. Everything was exactly right. Everything was exactly Reese. Except Sienna was telling me he was also on a private jet 30,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean. Sienna's having some issues with a passenger, I heard myself say, my voice coming out steady and controlled. 15 years as a fraud investigator for the IRS had trained me to maintain composure when reality stopped making sense. Nothing serious. Reese nodded, taking a sip of his chamomile tea from the navy blue mug I'd bought him 3 Christmases ago. Tell her I said hi. I'm going to finish reading that merger proposal upstairs. Client wants feedback by morning. I watched him cross the living room, each movement familiar and ordinary. The way he held his mug with both hands. The slight hitch in his left knee from an old running injury. The soft padding of his bare feet on our hardwood floor. He climbed the stairs. The third step from the top creaked under his weight like it always did, and disappeared down the hallway. His office door clicked shut. When the sound faded, I brought the phone back to my ear. My hands were shaking now. Sienna, what exactly did you see? Everything, Dane. Her voice was low, like she was trying not to be overheard. I could hear the ambient noise of a private jet cabin in the background, the low hum of engines, muffled conversations. He walked up to my aircraft 40 minutes ago at Signature Flight Support. Signed the manifest. I watched him sign it. Reese Chandler, clear as day. He's traveling with a woman, red hair, early 30s, expensive clothes. He introduced her to my co-pilot as his wife. My stomach twisted. His wife. She's wearing a wedding ring, Dane. He's wearing his. They're sitting in the main cabin right now and they look, she paused. They look like a couple. Comfortable. Like they've been together for years. I stood up from the couch, my legs unsteady. The documentary I'd been half watching still played on mute. Images of corporate criminals being led away in handcuffs. How many times had I helped put people like that behind bars? How many fraud cases had I built from nothing but inconsistencies and patterns that didn't quite add up? And I'd never suspected my own husband of anything. Send me a photo, I said, my investigator instincts kicking in. Right now. Already did. I pulled the phone away from my ear and opened my messages. The image loaded slowly. Our Wi-Fi had been spotty all week, appearing line by line from top to bottom. When it fully resolved, something inside my chest cracked. There was Reese. Unmistakably, undeniably Reese. Same sharp jawline. Same dark hair with gray starting at the temples that he'd been self-conscious about lately. Same distinctive scar above his left eyebrow. The thin white line that caught the light at certain angles. Same Patek Philippe watch with the blue face that I'd given him for our 5th anniversary, the one he never took off. He sat in a plush leather seat, leaning toward a striking redhead in her early 30s. His hand covered hers on the armrest between them. They were both looking at something on his phone, laughing. Real laughter. The The kind that comes from shared jokes and easy intimacy. But what destroyed me wasn't the intimacy. It was what he was wearing. The Tom Ford suit. Charcoal gray with thin pinstripes. I'd picked it up from the dry cleaners last Tuesday. I'd seen it hanging in our bedroom closet yesterday morning when I'd grabbed my jacket for work. I remembered because I'd thought about how good he looked in that suit, how it made his shoulders look broader. My body moved on autopilot. I climbed the stairs, my footsteps soft on the carpet runner. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. Everything felt slightly off, like reality had tilted a few degrees sideways. Our bedroom looked exactly as I'd left it that morning. Bed made, Reese's side always more carefully done than mine. His nightstand with the biography of some tech billionaire he'd been reading for 3 weeks. My jewelry box on the dresser. The framed photo from our wedding day on the wall. Both of us laughing, my white dress catching the sunset light. I walked to his closet and opened the double doors with hands that had started trembling. The Tom Ford suit was gone. Empty space on the wooden rod where it should have been. I ran my hand along the hangers, counting in my head. 3 of his favorite dress shirts were missing. The light blue one he wore to important meetings, the white one with French cuffs, the pale gray one he'd had custom made last year. His leather travel bag, the one he'd used since before we met, wasn't on its usual shelf. My breath came faster. I knelt down and reached for the safe we kept hidden behind shoe boxes on the closet floor. My fingers punched in the combination. Our wedding anniversary, a code we'd chosen together. The door swung open. 2 passports sat inside. I picked them both up with shaking hands. Same name on each cover, Reese Chandler. I opened the first one. Newer, the pages still crisp. Same birth date, August 15, 1982. Same basic information. But the passport number was different. The photo showed Reese, but something about it felt wrong. Too perfect. Too precise. Like a high-quality reproduction rather than the slightly awkward photo that standard passport pictures always produced. The second passport was older, more worn, the pages showing stamps from trips I remembered. London 2 years ago for his business conference. Tokyo last year for our anniversary. Boston 2 weeks ago for my brother's wedding. This was the real one. This was the passport I'd seen him use dozens of times. But if the real passport was here in our safe, what passport had the man on Sienna's jet used to board an international flight? Above me, I heard Reese's office door open. Footsteps in the hallway. Moving toward the stairs. I shoved both passports back into the safe, closed it, pushed the shoe boxes back into place. My phone buzzed with another text from Sienna. Asterisk, they just took off. Flight plan filed for Dubai, then connecting to the Maldives. The woman's name on the manifest is Claire Ashford. 20 minutes ago she introduced herself to our crew as Mrs. Chandler. She's wearing a diamond ring that looks like it cost more than my car. Asterisk. Mrs. Chandler. My name. My identity. Being worn by a stranger while my husband, or someone who looked exactly like him, sat upstairs in our brownstone supposedly reading merger proposals. I walked back downstairs, forcing my breathing to steady. The man who looked like Reese had returned to the living room. He sat on our worn leather couch now, right where I'd been sitting when Sienna's call came through. Papers were spread across the coffee table. He'd put on his reading glasses, the tortoise-shell frames I'd helped him pick out last year. He looked absorbed, focused, completely at ease in our home. I needed to test him. Carefully. Subtly. The way I'd tested hundreds of people suspected of fraud over the years. Asking questions they didn't realize were tests. Watching for the small inconsistencies that revealed bigger lies. Reese, I said, keeping my voice casual as I sat down beside him. Didn't you say you had that conference in Milwaukee this weekend? He looked up from his papers, confusion flickering across his features. His head tilted slightly to the left. Exactly the way Reese always tilted his head when he was puzzled. Milwaukee. He paused, appearing to think about it. No, sweetheart. That's next month. This weekend I'm staying home. We talked about finally organizing the garage, remember? My heart hammered against my ribs. We had never talked about organizing the garage. Not once. The real Reese hated garage organization with a burning passion. He'd rather do our taxes by hand than spend a weekend sorting through boxes in our garage. And he definitely had a conference in Atlanta this weekend. I'd helped him pack his presentation materials yesterday afternoon. We'd discussed his flight times. I'd reminded him to bring his phone charger. Unless I'd imagined all of that. Unless I was losing my mind. Right? I said, manufacturing a smile that felt plastic on my face. The garage. Sorry, work's been crazy. I forgot. You've been under a lot of stress with that audit, he said, returning his attention to his papers. His voice was warm, concerned, exactly how Reese sounded when he worried about my workload. Maybe you should take a bath, go to bed early. I'll be up in an hour. I sat there studying every detail of his face. The slight wrinkles at the corners of his eyes. The tiny mole on his right cheekbone. The way his jaw tensed slightly when he concentrated on reading. Everything was perfect. Everything was exactly Reese. But something was wrong. I could feel it the way you can feel a storm coming before the first drop of rain falls. How was your day? I asked, keeping my tone light and conversational. My phone sat face down on the cushion beside me, audio recording app running. An old investigator's trick I'd learned my first year at the IRS. The usual chaos, he replied without looking up from his papers. The Bergstrom acquisition is getting complicated. Their CFO is dragging his feet on disclosures. My blood turned cold. The real Reese never said acquisition. He'd been working on the Bergstrom deal for 3 months straight. 3 months of coming home frustrated, of discussing strategy over dinner, of practicing his pitch for the board meeting. In all that time, dozens of conversations, hundreds of mentions, he had always called it the Bergstrom deal. The terminology had become muscle memory. He'd say it distracted. He'd say it half asleep. He'd never once called it an acquisition. That's frustrating, I said carefully, watching his face for any sign that he realized his mistake. Didn't you have lunch with Tom about it today? What did he think? Tom's in London this week, he said smoothly, turning a page without looking up. We're doing a video call tomorrow instead to strategize. Tom wasn't in London. I'd seen his social media post 4 hours ago. A photo from his daughter's soccer game in Naperville with the caption, Thursday night under the lights. Nothing beats watching this kid play. The post had 37 likes and a string of comments from his friends. 2 mistakes. Small ones. Tiny cracks in an otherwise flawless performance. But I'd built an entire career on finding tiny cracks. I'd traced embezzled millions through offshore accounts by following inconsistencies that most people would have missed. I'd caught tax cheats who'd been operating for years because of small errors in their patterns. The man sitting next to me, wearing my husband's face and voice, was failing tests he didn't know he was taking. I stood up, my legs surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. I'll be right back, I said. Bathroom. I walked upstairs, my footsteps measured and calm. Closed the bathroom door. Turned on the fan for noise cover. Sat down on the edge of the bathtub and pulled out my phone with hands that were shaking again. Lauren Caswell answered on the second ring. It's 11 o'clock at night, Dane. This better be good. Lauren was former FBI, now private security consulting. We'd met 5 years ago during a joint task force investigation into corporate fraud. She'd become one of my closest friends, the kind of person who'd shown up at my father's funeral with bourbon and tissues and hadn't left until I'd stopped crying. Lauren. My voice came out steady, controlled, professional. I need you at my house right now. And I need you to bring that facial recognition software you're always talking about. The one that can detect surgical alterations. The silence on her end lasted exactly 3 seconds. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted into the clipped, focused tone she used when something serious was happening. What's going on? I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. Same auburn hair I'd had for 37 years. Same green eyes. Same small scar on my chin from falling off a bike when I was 8. Same face I'd seen every morning for my entire life. But the woman staring back at me was different now. Because some truths once discovered can't be undiscovered. Some realities once broken can't be put back together. My cousin Sienna just called from her private jet. I said, each word deliberate and careful. She says a man who looks exactly like Reese boarded her flight to Dubai an hour ago with another woman. Signed the manifest as Reese Chandler. Introduced the woman as his wife. Okay, Lauren said slowly. That's weird, but Reese is downstairs in our living room right now. He's been here all evening. I watched him make tea. I watched him go upstairs to his office. I watched him come back down. Another beat of silence. You think someone's impersonating him? I don't know what I think. I gripped the edge of the sink, my knuckles going white. But he's wearing a suit that should be in our closet and it's not there. There are 2 passports in our safe with his name on them. And he just made 2 mistakes. Small ones, but mistakes the real Reese would never make. Wrong terminology for a project he's been obsessing over. Wrong information about his friend's location. I heard Lauren moving, the rustle of fabric, the jingle of keys. I'm leaving now. 20 minutes. Don't confront him. Don't let him know you suspect anything. Just act normal until I get there. What if the man downstairs is the real Reese? The question came out small and frightened. What if I'm going crazy? You're not going crazy, Lauren said firmly. You're one of the best fraud investigators I've ever worked with. If you think something's wrong, something's wrong. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Just hold tight. She hung up. I sat there on the edge of the bathtub, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to dead air. Downstairs, I could hear the man who might or might not be my husband moving around in the living room. Papers rustling. The soft sound of him clearing his throat. My phone buzzed with another message from Sienna. This time it was a second photo. The man who looked like Reese sat with his arm around the redhead's shoulders. She was leaning into him, her head resting against his chest. His chin was on top of her head. Both of them had their eyes closed, faces peaceful and content. They looked like a couple who'd been together for years. Who knew each other's rhythms and habits. Who'd built a life together. Below the photo, Sienna had typed, "I asked my co-pilot to chat with them during beverage service. He said they're celebrating their 3rd wedding anniversary. Said they're going to the Maldives for 2 weeks. The woman told him they've been planning this trip for months. 3rd wedding anniversary. 3 years. Reese and I had been married for 7 years. Which meant if that man on the plane was telling the truth, he'd been married to someone else for almost half of our marriage." I walked back downstairs on legs that felt disconnected from my body. The man on the couch looked up when I entered, giving me that soft smile that had always made my heart skip a beat. "Feel better?" he asked. "Yeah," I lied. "Just tired." I sat down beside him, close enough to touch, and waited for Lauren to arrive with technology that would tell me whether my husband was my husband. Whether my marriage had been real. Whether anything about the last 7 years had been true. Outside, a car pulled up in front of our brownstone. Lauren had made it in 15 minutes instead of 20. Everything was about to change. Everything was about to break. And the man sitting next to me, whoever he really was, had no idea the trap was about to spring shut. Lauren stepped through our front door carrying a sleek metal briefcase that looked like it belonged in a spy thriller. She wore all black, jeans, turtleneck, leather jacket, and her dark hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail that made her look ready for combat. Her eyes swept the living room in one practiced motion, cataloging exits and sightlines the way she'd been trained to do at Quantico. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice low. I gestured toward the ceiling. "Upstairs. Office. He's been working on some merger proposal for the last hour." She set the briefcase on our coffee table and opened it with 2 precise clicks. Inside sat a laptop and what looked like a modified digital camera with attachments I didn't recognize. "This will take about 3 minutes," she said, her fingers already moving across the keyboard. "The software scans facial geometry and compares it to reference images. If there's been surgical alteration, it'll flag the inconsistencies." "And if it's really him?" I asked, hearing the fear in my own voice. "If I'm just..." "Then we figure that out too." Lauren looked up at me, her expression softening for just a moment. "But Dane, I've known you for 5 years. You don't panic. You don't jump to conclusions. If you called me at 11 at night saying something's wrong, something's wrong." We crept upstairs together, Lauren moving with the silent efficiency of someone who'd done surveillance operations for a living. The hallway was dark except for the strip of light under Reese's office door. Through the crack where the door didn't quite meet the frame, I could see him sitting at his desk, typing on his laptop, completely absorbed in whatever he was working on. Lauren raised the camera and aimed it through the gap. The device made no sound, but I could see a faint red light scanning back and forth. The man at the desk, whoever he was, continued typing, oblivious to the technology dissecting his face millimeter by millimeter. 3 minutes felt like 3 hours. I stood there in my own hallway watching someone who looked exactly like my husband, wondering if I was about to discover I'd been sleeping next to a stranger for months. Or worse, wondering if I was about to discover I was having some kind of breakdown, That paranoia and stress had made me see patterns that didn't exist. Lauren finally lowered the camera and gestured toward the stairs. We descended in silence, each step careful and measured. Back in the living room, she sat on the couch and opened her laptop, pulling up the analysis results. I sat beside her, my hands clenched into fists in my lap. "Okay," Lauren said, her voice taking on the clinical tone she used when delivering bad news. "This man has the same basic facial structure as your husband. Same bone structure, same general proportions. But there are micro differences that indicate surgical alteration." She pulled up a split-screen image. Photos of Reese from my phone on one side, the scan from upstairs on the other. Red lines and measurements covered both images. The distance between his pupils is off by 1.3 millimeters. His ear shape is 97% accurate but not anatomically perfect. The antihelix curve is slightly different. The scar above his eyebrow is positioned correctly, but under magnification the tissue structure is wrong. That's a surgical recreation, not an original injury. Lauren's finger traced the measurements on screen. Whoever this is, they've had extensive cosmetic surgery. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars in procedures, probably done overseas where medical regulations are looser and records can disappear. My breath came out shaky. "So that's not Reese?" "No. That's someone who's been surgically altered to look like Reese." The room tilted slightly. I gripped the edge of the couch, forcing myself to breathe. How is that even possible? How long would something like that take? 6 months, maybe longer. Multiple surgeries spaced out to allow for healing. Bone work, cartilage grafts, soft tissue manipulation. Lauren closed the laptop. "This isn't some amateur operation. This is professional-level identity theft. Which means there's serious money behind it." Money. The word triggered something in my investigator brain. A shift from shock to analysis, from victim to hunter. I'd spent 15 years following money trails that people thought they'd hidden. I'd traced embezzled funds through shell companies in 12 different countries. I'd found offshore accounts that tax cheats swore didn't exist. If there was money involved, I could find it. "I need to check our accounts," I said, standing up. "All of them." Lauren followed me to the kitchen where my laptop sat on the table, still open to the documentary streaming site I'd abandoned hours ago. I pulled up our bank login and entered my credentials with fingers that had steadied now that I had a task, a direction, something concrete to investigate. "What am I looking for?" Lauren asked, pulling a chair beside me. "Inconsistencies. Geographic anomalies. Spending patterns that don't match his supposed location." My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up account after account. If the real Reese has been living a separate life, he's been funding it somehow. And that money has to come from somewhere. The joint checking account looked normal at first glance. Regular deposits from his consulting firm. Predictable monthly expenses. Mortgage, utilities, groceries, gas. Nothing alarming. Nothing that would trigger automatic fraud alerts from the bank. But I didn't stop at the surface. I pulled up credit card statements going back 6 months and started cross-referencing charges with Reese's calendar, with my own memories of where he'd claimed to be on specific dates. That's when the pattern emerged. "There," I said, my finger stabbing at the screen. "Ritz-Carlton, Dubai. March 15th through 17th. That's the weekend he said he was in Cleveland for a client emergency." I clicked on the itemized charges. Room service for 2. Spa treatments for 2. Couples massage, facial treatments. A $3,200 dinner at Nobu. "I remember that weekend," I said, my voice hollow. "I was home alone with a migraine. He called me twice to check on me." His voice was so concerned. He said he wished he could be home instead of stuck in boring meetings. Lauren leaned closer, reading the charges. "He wasn't in Cleveland." "No." I scrolled further, the evidence mounting with each new statement. "Cartier in Geneva. $47,000. That's from the conference he complained about for weeks. Said it was tedious and corporate and he couldn't wait to come home." I pulled up another statement. "Van Cleef and Arpels in Paris. $63,000 in jewelry. I've never received jewelry from Van Cleef and Arpels in my life." The dates corresponded with a weekend when Reese had supposedly been visiting his mother in Connecticut. His mother, who'd been in declining health, who he'd said needed help sorting through his late father's belongings. I'd offered to come with him. He'd insisted I stay home and rest, that I'd been working too hard, that his mother would be more comfortable with just him there. How much total? Lauren asked. I opened a spreadsheet and started copying numbers, my investigator training taking over. Years of building fraud cases had taught me to be methodical, thorough, emotionless when cataloging evidence. The luxury hotel charges topped $60,000. The jewelry purchases added another $110,000. High-end restaurants, private car services, first-class flights to cities he'd never mentioned visiting. But that was just the obvious spending. Wait, I said, pulling up our savings account. There's something else. I'd been so focused on credit card charges that I almost missed the real crime. Wire transfers. Small ones. $9,500 each. Just below the $10,000 federal reporting threshold that would trigger automatic alerts to the IRS and FinCEN. I counted them manually, creating a new spreadsheet column, my stomach sinking with each entry. 27 transfers over 4 months. All going to the same account. $257,000, I said quietly. He's been draining our savings in small increments for 4 months. Lauren whistled low. That's sophisticated. Someone told him about the $10,000 reporting requirement. I clicked on the receiving account information. Meridian Holdings, LLC. Registered address in Georgetown, Grand Cayman. A shell company in a jurisdiction famous for banking secrecy and minimal disclosure requirements. But I'd spent 15 years chasing money through shell companies. I knew how to trace these structures. I pulled up corporate registry databases, used access credentials from my IRS work that I probably shouldn't have used for personal business. Meridian Holdings was owned by another shell company in Panama. That company was owned by a trust in Cyprus. The layers were designed to obscure, to frustrate, to make tracking the ultimate beneficiary nearly impossible. Nearly. But not completely. The Cyprus Trust lists 3 beneficiaries, I said, my mouth going dry as I read the names on the screen. Reese Chandler, Claire Ashford, and someone named Julian Cross. Lauren pulled out her phone and started searching. Julian Cross. Los Angeles. Represented by, oh, this is interesting. Represented by a boutique agency that specializes in corporate training and role-playing exercises for executives. Role-playing, I repeated. Like pretending to be someone else. Exactly like that. I sat back in my chair, the full scope of it crystallizing in my mind. Reese had hired an actor, paying him hundreds of thousands of dollars, to undergo surgery and replace him at home while the real Reese built a new life with another woman. He'd been systematically looting our joint assets, hiding the money in offshore accounts, preparing for a clean exit. The property transfers he'd mentioned in his email. The divorce that would finalize remotely. He wasn't planning to leave me. He was planning to disappear completely, taking everything we'd built together and leaving me with nothing. I need to access his computer, I said. The imposter's computer. If Reese hired this Julian Cross, there has to be a contract. Communications. Evidence. Lauren held up the USB drive. This will clone his entire hard drive in about 90 seconds. But Dane, what we're doing here is legally questionable. If this ends up in court. I don't care. The words came out harder than I'd intended. He hired someone to steal my face, my life, my reality. He's stolen $250,000 from our accounts. He's bought jewelry for another woman with money from our savings. I'm not worried about the legality of accessing a computer in my own house. Lauren studied me for a moment, then nodded. Hey. But we wait until he's asleep. If he catches us. He won't. We waited. 2 hours that felt like days. I sat at the kitchen table pretending to work on case files while actually tracking every sound from upstairs. At 1:47 a.m., I heard the office door open. Footsteps in the hallway. The bathroom faucet running. Then footsteps again moving toward the bedroom. I gave it 30 minutes. Long enough for him to complete Reese's nighttime routine. The specific brand of toothpaste, the face wash, the habit of reading for exactly 15 minutes before turning off the light. When the house fell silent, Lauren and I moved. We crept upstairs like burglars in my own home. The office door was closed but not locked. Lauren inserted the USB drive into the computer tower, her fingers flying across the keyboard, bypassing password protection with software I didn't ask questions about. The progress bar filled agonizingly slowly. 60 seconds. 70. 80. Down the hall I heard movement from the bedroom. The creak of bed springs. Footsteps. Almost done, Lauren whispered. The footsteps moved toward the hallway. Toward the bathroom. The door closed with a soft click. The progress bar hit 100%. Lauren ejected the drive and we slipped out of the office, closing the door with millimeter precision. We were back downstairs before the toilet flushed. In the kitchen, Lauren plugged the drive into her laptop. I'll need time to go through all this. There's a lot here. How long? Give me 30 minutes. I made coffee while Lauren worked, the familiar ritual helping to steady my shaking hands. Outside, the first hints of dawn were starting to lighten the sky. Thursday night had bled into Friday morning. 24 hours ago, my biggest concern had been finishing an audit report by deadline. Now I was learning that my entire marriage had been a performance. Got it, Lauren said suddenly. Dane, you need to see this. I moved behind her chair, coffee forgotten, and looked at the screen. A folder labeled Performance Contract, Confidential. Inside were PDFs, emails, payment records. The contract was with Julian Cross. $75,000 up front. $25,000 monthly for ongoing performance maintenance. Bonuses for maintaining accuracy of character portrayal without detection. But worse than the contract were the notes. Page after page of them. My life reduced to stage directions. Asterisk subject takes coffee with oat milk and 1 sugar. Subject calls mother every Sunday at 2 p.m. without fail. Subject becomes emotional during the final scene of Casablanca. Avoid watching this film. Subject's father died March 12, 2022. Emotional trigger. Do not mention unless she brings it up first. Subject prefers missionary position. Typically initiates intimacy on weekends. Asterisk. My stomach turned. Every intimate detail of my life, catalogued and handed to a stranger like a script. There's more, Lauren said quietly. She opened an email thread between Reese and Claire Ashford, dated back 8 months. Plans. Updates. Logistics. And then from 3 weeks ago the email that made everything perfectly horribly clear. Asterisk 6 more weeks and we're free. Julian's doing better than expected. She hasn't suspected anything. Once the property transfers clear and the offshore accounts are established, we can disappear to the Maldives. The divorce will finalize remotely. By the time she figures it out, we'll be untouchable. Thank you for being patient, Claire. Our real life starts soon. Asterisk. I read it 3 times. My hands were steady. My voice was steady. But inside, something had crystallized into cold, focused rage. Reese hadn't just betrayed me. He'd orchestrated an elaborate con to steal everything while keeping me docile and unsuspecting. He'd forgotten one crucial detail, though. I'd spent 15 years hunting people who thought they were too smart to get caught. And I was very, very good at my job. I stared at that email for a long time. Our real life starts soon. As if the 7 years we'd spent together had been some kind of rehearsal. As if I'd been a placeholder he was waiting to discard. Lauren was saying something about contacting the FBI, about building a case, about doing things through proper channels. But I wasn't listening. My mind had shifted into the same cold, calculating state it entered when I was building fraud cases. When emotion became liability and logic became weapon. I need to think, I said, standing up from the table. Give me an hour. Lauren looked at me with concern. Dane, you should try to sleep. You've been up all night. You're in shock. I'm not in shock. My voice came out flat, controlled. I'm planning. I went upstairs to my home office. Not Reese's office where Julian slept, but my own small space tucked into the converted attic. The room where I'd built cases against corporate criminals, where I'd traced embezzled millions through shell companies, where I'd learned to think like the people I was hunting. If I was going to destroy Reese, I needed to think like him. Anticipate his moves. Use his own greed against him. I opened my laptop and started working. The first step was creating bait he couldn't resist. Reese had always been obsessed with real estate investments, particularly in Dubai where property values had been climbing for years. He talked about it constantly during our early marriage. How if we could just get enough capital together, we could make a killing in the Middle Eastern property market. I opened a blank document and started drafting. Exclusive investment opportunity, Dubai Marina Development Project. I made it look professional, corporate, legitimate. Projected returns of 30% annually. Limited partnership positions available. Time-sensitive opportunity requiring immediate authorization. The key was making it require both our signatures. Something that would force him to access our shared accounts, to use his credentials, to leave a digital trail proving he was actively stealing from me. I backdated partnership documents, forged Reese's signature using samples from our legitimate paperwork. Years of examining fraudulent documents had taught me exactly what made forgeries look authentic. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was using skills I'd developed to catch criminals to now trap my own husband. But the real genius was in the code I embedded in the documents. Lauren had taught me basics of digital forensics during one of our joint investigations. Now I was putting that knowledge to use in ways she probably hadn't intended. I created a piece of malware disguised as a PDF signature verification tool. When Reese opened the document from an international IP address and entered his credentials to authorize the investment, the code would activate. It would freeze every account we shared. Checking, savings, investments, credit cards. It would lock down the offshore accounts I'd discovered in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. And it would simultaneously send alerts to the FBI's International Fraud Division, the IRS Criminal Investigation Unit, and Interpol. The beauty of it was that I didn't need to prove anything. His own actions would prove everything. The moment he tried to access our money from Dubai, he'd trigger a cascade of investigations that would bury him. I embedded the fake investment opportunity in our shared cloud storage, in a folder labeled Q3 Financial Review. Exactly the kind of boring paperwork that Reese always reviewed obsessively before making major financial decisions. He'd find it. His greed and his arrogance would make him unable to resist. By the time the sun started rising, turning our attic window from black to gray to gold, I had everything ready. The trap was set. Now I just needed to make sure Reese took the bait. I checked my phone. 3 messages from Sienna, sent over the past few hours. They're at the Burj Al Arab. Checked in under Mr. and Mrs. Chandler. Requested the royal suite. That's the same room you and Reese stayed in for your anniversary, isn't it? My co-pilot says they told the concierge they're celebrating their 3rd wedding anniversary. 3 years, Dane. He's been lying to you for at least that long. The royal suite. The same room where Reese had surprised me with champagne and roses 2 years ago. Where he told me I was the love of his life. Where I'd believed completely and naively that our marriage was real. Now he was there with Claire, probably saying the same things, making the same promises, living the same lie with a different woman. I called Sienna. She answered on the first ring. I need your help, I said without preamble. Are they still at the hotel? As far as I know. Want me to check? Yes. And I need you to do something else. I explained my plan, walking her through each step. By the time I finished, she was laughing, a low, dark sound full of satisfaction. You're devious, she said. I love it. When do you want me to? Give it 48 hours. I need time to make sure everything's in place here first. He has no idea what's coming, does he? No, I said. He thinks I'm too trusting. Too naive. He thinks I've spent the last 4 months sleeping next to an imposter without noticing. He's underestimated me completely. That's going to be his biggest mistake, Sienna said. The best part about all this? He spent hundreds of thousands of dollars hiring someone to replace himself, but he forgot the most important detail. What's that? You're smarter than he ever was. Her words settled over me like armor. He was right. Reese had always been clever. Smooth, charming, good at reading people and telling them what they wanted to hear. But I was the one who'd built a career finding patterns in chaos. Tracing money through deliberately obscured channels, seeing through deception that was designed to be invisible. He'd made a critical error. He'd confused my trust for stupidity. I ended the call with Sienna and went back downstairs. Lauren was still at the kitchen table, now going through the cloned files with systematic precision. I need coffee, I said. Real coffee. The kind that requires leaving the house. Lauren looked up at me. You should probably stay here. If Julian wakes up. Let him wake up. I need to talk to him anyway. As if summoned by my words, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Julian appeared in the kitchen doorway, his hair disheveled from sleep, wearing Reese's pajamas. For a moment, seeing him like that, vulnerable and half awake, the resemblance was so perfect it made my chest ache. Then he spoke and the illusion shattered. How long have you known? His voice was pure Los Angeles, Nothing like Reese's carefully modulated East Coast accent. Since the phone call, I said. But I've suspected something was wrong for weeks. He walked to the coffee maker, moving through Reese's morning routine on autopilot. Then he stopped, seemed to realize what he was doing and turned to face me. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything, but I am. Sit down, Julian. He sat. Lauren watched him with the flat, assessing stare she'd perfected during her FBI years. I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo, one of the images Sienna had sent of Reese and Claire on the jet. That's the man who hired you. Reese Chandler. He's currently in Dubai with his girlfriend, preparing to disappear with money stolen from our joint accounts while you sit here playing house with me. Julian stared at the photo. He told me you were separated, that you wouldn't sign divorce papers, that he needed someone to maintain appearances for business reasons. And you believed that? I wanted to believe it. His voice cracked slightly. I've been auditioning for 15 years. Waiting tables, driving for food delivery apps, watching younger actors get the roles I used to audition for. Then this guy approaches me with $75,000 cash up front, tells me all I have to do is play a role for 3 months. It was more money than I'd seen in my entire life. How did he find you? Through my agent. Said he worked for a corporate training company that needed someone for an immersive executive coaching program. Made it sound legitimate. By the time I realized it wasn't. He gestured helplessly at his face. I'd already had the surgery. Already committed. And the money kept coming. $25,000 a month. I told myself it was just acting. That I wasn't hurting anyone. Except you were, I said quietly. You've been sleeping in my bed, eating at my table, living in my house under false pretenses for 4 months. I know. He looked down at his hands that were shaped like Reese's hands but weren't. I know, and I'm sorry. If I could undo it. You can't. But you can help me make this right. His head snapped up. How? I explained my plan. The fake investment opportunity. The embedded malware. The trap I was setting for Reese that would freeze his assets and alert federal authorities the moment he tried to access our accounts from Dubai. I need you to do one more performance, I said. The best one of your life. Can you do that? Julian was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. What do you need? I need you to keep being Reese for 48 more hours. Act completely normal. If he contacts you, and he will, to coordinate the property transfer, you tell him everything is fine. That I suspect nothing. That the plan is working perfectly. You want me to lie to him. I want you to help me catch a criminal, I corrected. Reese has committed identity theft, fraud, embezzlement, and probably a dozen other crimes I haven't discovered yet. He's hired you as an accomplice, which means you're implicated whether you meant to be or not. But if you cooperate, if you help me build a case that will hold up in court, I'll make sure prosecutors know you were a victim too. And if I don't cooperate? Lauren spoke up for the first time. Then you're looking at federal charges. Identity theft alone carries up to 15 years. Add fraud, conspiracy, and the interstate nature of this scheme and you're talking about decades in prison. Julian went pale. I didn't know it was illegal. I swear I thought. It doesn't matter what you thought, I said. It matters what you knew and when you knew it. Right now you have a choice. Help me or go down with Reese. He stared at me for a long moment. I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. The same calculation Reese must have made when he decided I was worth betraying, that our marriage was worth destroying for money and a woman named Claire. Okay, Julian finally said. I'll help you. Tell me what you need. I pulled out a notepad and started writing. First, I need everything Reese gave you. The instruction manual about my life. Any communications you've had with him. Recording devices if he asked you to wear any. Everything. He gave me a phone. Separate from my personal phone. Said to only use it to contact him. All our communications are on there. Get it? Now. Julian stood and left the kitchen. I heard him climbing the stairs, moving around in Reese's office. When he came back, he carried a sleek black smartphone that I'd never seen before. He texts me every few days, Julian said. Checking that the performance is holding up. Asking if you suspect anything. Last message was yesterday morning. I took the phone and opened the messaging app. There was only one conversation thread, no contact name, just a Dubai number I didn't recognize. The most recent message sent at 9:47 a.m. yesterday. Status check. Any issues? Julian's response. All clear. She suspects nothing. Performance maintaining accuracy. Reese's reply. Good. Property transfer paperwork will be ready by Monday. Make sure she signs everything without reading too carefully. You know how she gets with legal documents, always overthinking. Keep her distracted. I read that message 3 times. Keep her distracted. As if I were a problem to be managed rather than a person. As if our marriage had been nothing more than an obstacle to work around. I need you to send him a message, I said to Julian. Right now. Tell him everything is perfect. Tell him you found the investment opportunity documents I've been working on, and that I'm excited about the Dubai property development. Tell him I'm already talking about how this could be our retirement fund. Julian took the phone and typed. His fingers moved quickly, easily, like he'd sent dozens of these messages before. Quick update. Found investment docs she's been reviewing. Dubai Marina property development. She's excited about it, already talking about early retirement. Thinks it's her idea to pursue it. Perfect timing for property transfer. She'll sign anything right now. We watched the screen together. 3 dots appeared almost immediately, showing Reese was typing a response. Excellent work. This is exactly what we needed. Transfer should clear by end of week. Keep the performance going just a few more days. Your final payment will be double the monthly rate. My hands clenched into fists. He was so confident. So sure of himself. So certain that his plan was working perfectly. He had no idea I'd just set a trap that would destroy everything he'd built. Send one more message, I told Julian. Tell him you'll make sure everything goes smoothly. Julian typed. Understood. Performance maintaining perfect accuracy. She suspects nothing. Reese's response was immediate. You've been worth every penny. This is why I hired the best. I handed the phone back to Julian and stood up. The sun was fully up now, light streaming through our kitchen windows, illuminating the room where I'd made breakfast for a stranger for 4 months without knowing it. 48 hours, I said. That's all I need. Can you maintain the performance that long? Julian nodded slowly. I can do it. But Dane, what happens after? When this all comes out, when he's arrested, what happens to me? That depends on how well you cooperate, Lauren said. Full disclosure, full testimony, full cooperation with investigators. Do that and I can probably get you probation and community service instead of prison time. And if I don't? Then you're going down as his accomplice, I said flatly. Your choice. He looked between us, seeing no sympathy, no softness, just 2 women who'd built careers on catching people who thought they were too smart to face consequences. I'll cooperate, he said finally. Whatever you need. I'll do it. I believed him. Not because I trusted him, I'd never trust anyone easily again, but because I recognized the look in his eyes. The same look I'd seen in dozens of fraud suspects over the years when they realized their only path forward was cooperation. The look of someone who'd finally understood the trap had already closed around them. 48 hours crawled by like 48 days. I went through the motions of normal life while my entire world balanced on the edge of a knife. I went to work, reviewed audit files, attended meetings where people talked about tax code amendments and compliance protocols. I nodded and took notes and contributed analysis like I always did, while inside my head I was counting down hours until Reese would access the fake investment documents and trigger the trap that would destroy him. Julian maintained his performance with unnerving precision. He made chamomile tea at 10:30 every night. He read the Financial Times over breakfast. He even took a client call on speakerphone, something Reese did frequently, and I listened to him discuss merger strategies using terminology and insights that could only have come from Reese's own instruction manual. Watching him was like watching a ghost. Every gesture perfect. Every mannerism exact. If I hadn't known the truth, I never would have suspected. On the second night, I sat in my attic office with Lauren, both of us staring at her laptop screen where monitoring software tracked activity on our shared cloud storage. The fake investment documents sat there, unopened, waiting. What if he doesn't take the bait? I asked, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at me since I'd planted the trap. He will, Lauren said with the confidence of someone who'd spent years profiling criminals. Everything you've told me about him says he can't resist. He's greedy, arrogant, and he thinks you're too naive to notice what he's doing. That combination makes people reckless. At 11:47 p.m. Chicago time, 6:47 a.m. in Dubai. The monitoring software pinged with an alert. Someone was accessing the Dubai Real Estate Opportunity folder. My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched the activity log populate in real time. The user was logged in as Reese Chandler. The IP address traced to the Burj Al Arab Hotel in Dubai. Lauren pulled up a second window, the one that gave us access to his laptop camera through the malware embedded in the documents. The image was grainy but clear enough. There was Reese. The real Reese. Not Julian's surgically altered approximation, but the actual man I'd married 7 years ago. He sat at a desk in what looked like an absurdly luxurious hotel suite, wearing reading glasses I'd bought him for his birthday 3 years ago. Behind him I could see floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Dubai's glittering skyline. And in the background, moving through the frame with languid ease, was Claire. She wore a silk robe, ivory-colored, expensive-looking, and carried a champagne glass. Her red hair was pulled up in a messy knot, and even through the low-quality camera feed she looked beautiful in that effortless way some women managed without appearing to try. She said something I couldn't hear and Reese laughed. A real laugh, warm and genuine, the kind I hadn't heard from him in months. Maybe years. Maybe never if I was being honest with myself. I watched him read through my carefully crafted lies. His cursor moved across the screen, highlighting passages, probably running mental calculations about projected returns and investment timelines. His expression shifted from interested to intrigued to excited, that particular light in his eyes that appeared when he thought he'd found a winning opportunity. He spent 11 minutes reviewing every page. I could almost see his brain working, evaluating risk versus reward, weighing the time-sensitive nature of the deal against the substantial returns I'd promised. Then he reached for his phone and made a call. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I could read his body language. Animated, enthusiastic gesturing as he spoke. Probably calling his financial advisor or attorney, verifying that the deal structure looked legitimate. After 5 minutes he hung up and turned back to his laptop. His cursor hovered over the authorization button. "Come on," Lauren whispered beside me. "Take it." He clicked. The authorization page loaded, requesting his digital signature and credentials to access our offshore accounts. This was the moment. If he entered that information, if he authenticated his identity from an international IP address while attempting to access accounts I'd flagged as potentially compromised, the trap would spring. Reese typed in his username, his password, his two-factor authentication code. He clicked submit. For 3 seconds nothing happened. Then his screen flooded with red warning messages in English, Arabic, and French. Federal fraud alerts. Account freeze notifications. Law enforcement contact information. Through the camera feed I watched his face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and finally, fear. He grabbed his phone again, fingers flying across the screen. Probably trying to access the accounts directly, to see if this was some kind of system error. But there was no error. Every account was frozen solid. Every asset locked down. And at that exact moment, alerts were hitting law enforcement servers across 3 continents, flagging an American citizen in Dubai attempting to access accounts linked to identity fraud and embezzlement. How long until Dubai police respond? I asked Lauren. She checked another window on her screen. Something that looked like a law enforcement dispatch system that she definitely shouldn't have had access to. They received the Interpol alert 90 seconds ago. Given the Burj Al Arab's location and Dubai's attitude toward financial crimes, I'd say 10 to 15 minutes. We waited. I couldn't look away from the camera feed. Reese had stood up now, pacing the suite, phone pressed to his ear. Claire appeared in the frame, her champagne forgotten, her expression shifting from confusion to concern as Reese explained whatever he was explaining. She grabbed his arm. He shook her off. They were arguing now. I could see it in their body language, the sharp gestures, the way Claire's face had gone pale. Lauren's dispatch monitor pinged with an update. Dubai police are en route. 3 units. They're taking this seriously. Good, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Inside I felt like I was vibrating at a frequency just below what humans could survive. But outside I was calm. Controlled. The same composure I'd maintained through hundreds of fraud investigations was holding. 12 minutes after Reese triggered the trap, Lauren's system flagged new activity. Hotel security footage from the Burj Al Arab lobby, obtained through methods Lauren still refused to explain. The feed showed Reese and Claire stepping out of an elevator, both dressed for dinner. Reese wore a suit I didn't recognize, probably purchased with stolen money. Claire wore a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. They looked like exactly what they were pretending to be: wealthy tourists on a luxury vacation. They didn't make it 10 feet before Dubai police intercepted them. 6 officers in crisp uniforms, moving with practiced efficiency. I watched Reese's face register shock as they called his name, as they announced he was under arrest, as they began reading charges in English and Arabic. And then, in a moment of spectacular stupidity that would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic, Reese ran. He actually tried to run. In one of the most surveilled hotels in one of the most security-conscious cities in the world. He made it maybe 20 feet before 2 officers tackled him. Not gently. Dubai police didn't seem concerned with American standards of excessive force. Claire's response was different. She started crying immediately, loud, theatrical sobs that echoed through the marble lobby. Through the security feed's audio, I could hear her claiming she didn't know anything about any crimes, that Reese had told her he was divorced, that she was just his girlfriend and knew nothing about fraud or stolen money. The officers handcuffed them both. Reese face down on the pristine lobby floor, Claire standing with her arms wrenched behind her back, mascara streaming down her face in black rivers. They're being charged with identity fraud, money laundering, and attempting to establish permanent residence with forged documents, Lauren said, reading updates from her law enforcement feed. The forged passport in your safe. Reese must have had it made for his exit plan. Dubai found matching documents in their hotel suite. I watched the footage of Reese being hauled to his feet, watched him struggle ineffectively against the officer's grip, watched the arrogance and confidence I'd once found attractive transform into panic and desperation. I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No triumph. Just a hollow kind of relief that the uncertainty was over, that reality had finally caught up with lies. There's something else, Lauren said quietly. Claire's real name isn't Claire Ashford. It's Claire Montgomery. She's wanted in California for credit card fraud and identity theft. Apparently, she and Reese were perfect for each other. That detail felt like the punchline to a joke I didn't find funny. Reese had destroyed our marriage, hired an actor to replace himself, stolen $250,000 from our accounts. All for a woman who was as much a fraud as he was. Lauren's phone rang. She answered, listened for 30 seconds, then looked at me with something like admiration. That was my contact at the FBI. They want you to know the Dubai arrest triggered alerts in 4 other countries where Reese had been moving money. They're calling it one of the most sophisticated marriage fraud schemes they've seen. They want your testimony for the prosecution. They'll have it, I said. Every detail. Every document. Every lie. But first I had a different performance to orchestrate. While Reese was being processed into Dubai police custody, I was preparing a show of my own back in Chicago. I spent the next 2 days sending carefully worded invitations to everyone in Reese's professional and personal life. Emergency morning meeting regarding critical business developments. Your immediate attendance required. 8 a.m. Friday at our residence. Vague enough to create alarm. Specific enough to ensure they'd come. Reese's business partners received invitations. His major clients received invitations. His mother, Helen, who'd spent 7 years making subtle comments about my clothes, my career, my failure to produce grandchildren, received an invitation. His brother Marcus, who'd always treated me like temporary furniture in Reese's life, received an invitation. I wanted witnesses. I wanted everyone who'd been part of Reese's respectable professional facade to see it crumble. Friday morning arrived cold and gray. Julian played his final role with the dedication of someone who understood his freedom depended on a convincing performance. He answered the door as each guest arrived, greeting them with Reese's firm handshake and reassuring smile. He made small talk about traffic and weather. He offered coffee from our kitchen, playing the gracious host in our brownstone. Helen arrived first, as I'd known she would. She wore pearls and a silk blouse, her gray hair perfectly styled, her expression already pinched with the particular brand of disapproval she reserved for me. She looked around our living room like she was cataloging evidence of my inadequacy as a wife. Marcus came next, expensive suit and irritated expression, checking his phone every 30 seconds like our emergency meeting was an inconvenience he'd deigned to tolerate. Then the business partners filed in. 3 men who'd built a consulting firm with Reese over 8 years, who'd trusted him with company finances and client relationships. They looked confused but professional, settling onto our furniture with coffee cups and polite murmurs. The clients came last. Axio, a real estate developer, a venture capitalist, people whose businesses were worth millions, who'd paid Reese substantial fees for strategic advice and financial guidance. I watched from the kitchen as Julian worked the room. Not a single person questioned his identity. Not one of them noticed the micro differences that Lauren's software had flagged, the tiny imperfections in his surgically altered face. They saw what they expected to see. They believed what was easiest to believe. At 8:47 a.m. exactly on schedule, there was a knock at our front door. I opened it to find 4 FBI agents in dark suits, badges already displayed, faces professionally neutral. "We have a warrant for the arrest of Reese Chandler," the lead agent said, her voice carrying into our crowded living room. Every conversation stopped. Every face turned toward the door. Julian didn't hesitate. He'd rehearsed this moment with me a dozen times. "That's me," he said, letting his Los Angeles accent replace the Princeton polish he'd been performing. "Except it's not." The silence in our living room was so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. "My real name is Julian Cross," he continued, his voice steady despite the room full of shocked faces. "I'm an actor from Los Angeles. I was hired by Reese Chandler 4 months ago to impersonate him as part of an elaborate fraud scheme. I've been cooperating fully with federal authorities and am prepared to testify to everything I know." Helen's hand flew to her pearl necklace like she could clutch dignity along with jewelry. Marcus's face went completely pale. The business partners looked at each other with expressions that cycled rapidly through disbelief, confusion, and dawning horror. And I stepped forward to take control of the room I'd spent 2 days choreographing. "My name is Dane Holloway," I said, my fraud investigator voice calm and professional. "And I'm going to explain exactly how my husband hired an actor to replace himself while he looted our assets and fled the country with his mistress." Then I played them the recording of Sienna's phone call, and began to methodically destroy every lie Reese had built. I pulled up Sienna's recorded phone call on my laptop and connected it to our television. The sound of her voice filled the living room, tight with tension, uncertain, asking if Reese was home with me. My own voice responded, "Yeah, he's in the kitchen making tea." "Why?" Then Sienna's impossible answer. "That's strange because a man who looks exactly like him just boarded my jet to Dubai. He signed the passenger manifest as Reese Chandler. He's sitting with a woman he called his wife." I watched the faces around the room as the recording played. Confusion. Disbelief. The first cracks in the comfortable reality they'd walked into this morning. I paused the recording and pulled up the first photo Sienna had sent. Reese in the private jet leaning toward Claire, both of them laughing like people who'd been together for years. "This photo was taken Thursday night at 10:52 p.m., I said. "While this man," I gestured toward Julian, who stood by the fireplace looking uncomfortable in Reese's face, "was here in our living room pretending to be my husband." Helen Chandler stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against our hardwood floor. Her face had gone red, that particular shade that came from rage mixing with humiliation. "This is absurd," she said, her voice shaking. "Dane, I don't know what kind of vindictive game you're playing, but I won't stand here and listen to you slander my son with these fabrications. You've always been jealous of his success, his family connections. This is obviously some elaborate scheme to what?" I interrupted, my voice calm. "To what purpose, Helen? What exactly do you think I'm gaining here?" She sputtered, gesturing vaguely at the FBI agents. "Attention. Sympathy. You're trying to frame him because he was planning to leave you. You couldn't handle rejection, so you've concocted this ridiculous story about actors and imposters and..." I pulled up a bank statement on the television screen. Red highlighted entries showing wire transfers. 27 of them. Each for $9,500. Each going to offshore accounts. "These transfers were made over the past 4 months, I said. Each one just below the $10,000 federal reporting threshold. Each one authorized with Reese's credentials while Julian here was sitting in our home. That's $257,000 stolen from our joint savings. Would you like to see the account statements showing where that money went?" Helen's mouth opened, closed. No words came out. I pulled up another document. These are invoices from a cosmetic surgery clinic in Seoul. Total cost $328,000. Paid from Reese's personal account. The procedures are listed here. Facial bone restructuring, cartilage grafts, soft tissue manipulation, scar recreation. The patient name is listed as Julian Cross. The desired outcome is listed as facial approximation of reference subject. I switched to another screen showing email timestamps. These are communications between Reese and Claire Ashford going back 10 months. They discuss hiring Julian. They discuss the surgery timeline. They discuss maintaining the deception while Reese transferred assets offshore. I paused, looking directly at Helen. This email is dated December 23rd. That's 2 days before Christmas, when Reese sat at your dining table with his arm around my shoulders, helping me through my first holiday without my father. The email subject line read, Timeline Update Property Transfers. The preview text was visible on the screen. Julian's performance is flawless. She suspects nothing. We'll be free by summer. Helen sat down slowly, her face no longer red but ashen. Her hand trembled as she reached for her pearl necklace, a gesture I'd seen her make 1,000 times when she was stressed or uncomfortable. Marcus, Reese's brother, stood up next. He looked like he was going to be sick. I didn't know, he said quickly, addressing the FBI agents. I had no involvement in any of this. I haven't even spoken to Reese in 3 weeks. We're not close. I barely. Mr. Chandler, one of the FBI agents said, we'll need a formal statement, but no one is suggesting you were involved. But my reputation, Marcus continued, his voice rising. My firm, this is going to destroy my career. I work at Whitmore and Associates. We handle institutional investments. If this gets out, if my name is connected to... It's already out, I said flatly. The arrest in Dubai was captured on hotel security footage. It's been playing on international news channels for the past 6 hours. Your brother tried to run from Dubai police in the lobby of the Burj Al Arab. They tackled him in front of 100 witnesses. It's gone viral. Marcus sat back down heavily, his face in his hands. I turned my attention to Reese's business partners. 3 men who'd spent 8 years building a consulting firm, who'd trusted him with company finances, client relationships, strategic decisions. You should check your company accounts, I said. All of them. Because if Reese was stealing from our joint savings, I guarantee he was stealing from you too. The one whose name I thought was David already had his phone out, fingers flying across the screen. His face went from concern to horrified as he read whatever appeared on his display. There are discrepancies, he said quietly. Client trust accounts. I'm seeing unauthorized transfers dated back 6 months. How much? One of his partners asked. David's voice shook. I need to call our accountant. But from what I'm seeing here, it looks like it could be over $1 million. The third partner stood up so fast his coffee cup tipped over, spilling dark liquid across our coffee table. Nobody moved to clean it up. We need to freeze everything. Right now. Before this gets worse. It's already frozen, one of the FBI agents said. Federal hold on all accounts connected to Reese Chandler pending investigation of fraud and embezzlement charges. Your accountant has already been contacted. I watched the 3 men process this information. Their successful consulting firm, built on reputation and trust, was now tainted by association with a man who'd stolen from everyone who'd trusted him. One of the clients, a woman named Victoria who ran a tech startup, stood up without saying a word and walked toward our front door. I'd seen her on Forbes' 30 Under 30 list last year. She trusted Reese with her company's expansion strategy, paid him substantial consulting fees. Victoria, I called after her. You should check your business accounts too. Reese had access to your financial statements. If he saw an opportunity. She turned back, her expression cold and calculating. I'm already texting my CFO. And then I'm calling our lawyer to discuss how we distance ourselves from this situation and what liability your husband's firm carries for the breach of fiduciary duty. She looked at the 3 partners. You'll be hearing from our legal team. She left. The door closed behind her with finality. Within 5 minutes, 2 other clients had also excused themselves, pulling out phones as they walked, already making calls to lawyers and accountants and public relations firms. The only person who didn't look angry or scared or calculating was Reese's secretary, A quiet woman named Margaret who'd worked for him since the firm started. She sat on the edge of our couch, tears streaming down her face, looking completely devastated. "Mrs. Chandler," she said to me, her voice small and broken. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I scheduled all his travel, I managed his calendar, and I never—" Her voice caught. "Are you okay? Is there anything I can do?" That small moment of genuine human kindness in a room full of people scrambling to protect themselves made my throat tight. I swallowed hard, forcing the emotion down. "Thank you, Margaret," I managed. "I appreciate that." She nodded, wiping her eyes with a tissue from her purse. My phone rang, an international number lighting up the screen. I answered and put it on speaker. "Mrs. Chandler?" A man's voice, crisp and formal. "This is Inspector Khalid Rahman with Dubai Police. I'm calling to inform you that Reese Chandler and Claire Montgomery, also known as Claire Ashford, are currently in custody at our central detention facility." The room went completely silent. "They've been charged with identity fraud, money laundering, attempting to establish permanent residence with forged documentation, and several violations of United Arab Emirates financial crimes statutes. We've also discovered that Ms. Montgomery has outstanding warrants in California for credit card fraud and identity theft." I looked around the room at all these people hearing this for the first time. Helen had gone completely white. Marcus looked like he might actually vomit. "Inspector Rahman," I said clearly, "I want to press all available charges against both of them. Every charge your jurisdiction allows." "Understood. I should also inform you that Mr. Chandler attempted to flee when we arrested him in the hotel lobby. He was unsuccessful. The incident was captured on security footage and has unfortunately received substantial media attention." "How substantial?" "The video has been viewed several million times on various platforms. American news channels have been running the footage with headlines about an elaborate marriage fraud scheme. Your husband has become, as they say, viral." I saw Marcus close his eyes, his career crumbling in real time. "The United States Attorney's Office has already contacted us regarding extradition proceedings," Inspector Rahman continued. "Given the severity of the charges and Mr. Chandler's attempt to flee, he'll remain in custody here until those proceedings conclude. Do you have any questions?" "How long until extradition?" "These matters typically take several weeks, sometimes months. But given the high-profile nature of this case and the cooperation between our jurisdictions, I expect it will move relatively quickly." In the background of the call, I heard a woman crying, loud, theatrical sobs. Claire's voice came through faintly. "I didn't know about the money. He told me he was divorced. I'm a victim here too." Inspector Rahman's voice took on a slightly dry tone. "Ms. Montgomery has been quite vocal about her innocence. However, we found emails on her devices discussing the financial planning with Mr. Chandler. She was not, as she claims, an unwitting participant." "Thank you, Inspector," I said. "I'll be available for any additional information you need. We'll be in touch regarding your testimony. Have a good day, Mrs. Chandler." The call ended. The silence in our living room felt heavy enough to crack the foundation. My laptop chimed with an alert, the notification I'd been waiting for. I pulled it up on the television screen. "Federal Asset Seizure Notice," in bold letters across the top. "The frozen offshore accounts have been officially seized as evidence," I announced to the room. "Every dollar Reese stole is now locked down." But the forensic analysis Lauren helped me run found something interesting. I pulled up the detailed breakdown. The total stolen funds amount to $4.2 million. That includes $257,000 from our joint accounts, $1.3 million from your company's client trust accounts. I looked at the business partners, and nearly $2 million from various other sources we're still tracing. Some of it appears to be from your mother's trust fund, Marcus. Marcus's head snapped up. "What?" "Reese had power of attorney for your mother's medical trust. Looks like he's been making unauthorized withdrawals for about 8 months. Helen made a sound like all the air had left her body. The lead FBI agent stepped forward. "Mrs. Holloway, we're going to need detailed testimony about your investigative process. Your forensic accounting work is the foundation of this case. Would you be willing to provide that?" "Absolutely," I said. "Every document, every timeline, every piece of evidence I gathered. You'll have complete cooperation." The agent nodded. We'll also need statements from everyone present. This will take several hours. As the agents began separating people for individual interviews, I excused myself to the kitchen. My hands were shaking now that the performance was over, now that the carefully maintained composure was no longer necessary. Julian followed me, still wearing Reese's face but moving like himself, shoulders less rigid, gestures less controlled. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. I looked at him, this stranger who'd been paid to steal my reality, and felt a strange, complicated mix of emotions. Anger at what he'd been part of, pity for how he'd been used, gratitude that he'd chosen cooperation over loyalty to Reese. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Ask me in 6 months." He nodded, understanding that some questions didn't have immediate answers. Through the kitchen doorway, I could see the FBI agents conducting interviews, could hear Helen crying softly as she gave her statement, could see Marcus texting frantically, probably to his firm's crisis management team. Everything was collapsing exactly as I'd planned. Every lie exposed. Every theft documented. Every betrayal laid bare. So why did victory feel so hollow? The FBI interviews took 6 hours. By the time the last agent left our brownstone, it was late afternoon and I felt like I'd been hollowed out from the inside. Every question had required reliving some piece of the betrayal. How long had I suspected? What made me check the accounts? When did I realize the man in my house wasn't my husband? I'd answered everything with the same methodical precision I used in my own investigations. Dates, times, documentation references. No emotion in my voice, just facts presented in logical sequence. But now, standing alone in my kitchen while Julian packed his belongings upstairs and Lauren made phone calls in the living room, the emotional bill came due. My hands started shaking. Then my legs. I sat down hard on one of our kitchen chairs, the same chairs Reese and I had picked out together 4 years ago at a furniture store in Evanston, debating between oak and walnut finishes like it mattered, like we were building something permanent. I put my head in my hands and tried to breathe through the wave of delayed shock rolling over me. 7 years. 7 years of marriage, and I didn't know how much of it had been real. Had he loved me at the beginning? On our wedding day when he'd cried during his vows? During our honeymoon in Greece when we'd stayed up all night talking about the future we'd build together? Or had I just been convenient? A cover story he could maintain while he figured out what he really wanted? My phone buzzed. Then buzzed again. And again. I pulled it out to find my inbox flooded with notifications. News alerts. Social media mentions. Messages from numbers I didn't recognize. I opened the news app. The headline made my stomach drop. Chicago investment consultant arrested in Dubai for elaborate marriage fraud scheme involving body double. Below it, a video. I clicked play and watched grainy hotel security footage of Reese trying to run from Dubai police, getting tackled in the marble lobby of the Burj Al Arab. The video had been viewed 3.7 million times in 6 hours. Another headline. Wife catches husband's surgically altered imposter after cousin's call from private jet. Another. Forensic accountant uses own skills to expose husband's $4 million fraud. They were calling it the double life case. My name was in every article. My photo, pulled from my IRS employee directory, appeared on news websites. My professional credentials were being discussed on financial news channels. I'd wanted to destroy Reese's carefully constructed life. I'd succeeded beyond my expectations. But I hadn't considered that the explosion would also consume my own privacy, my own anonymity, my own ability to just exist without being the woman from that story. My phone rang. A Chicago number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Dane Holloway? A woman's voice, professional and warm. My name is Patricia Hamilton. I'm a senior correspondent with Bloomberg Financial News. I know you must be overwhelmed right now, but I'd like to request an interview. I promise to treat your story with the respect and accuracy it deserves. I'm not giving interviews, I said automatically. I understand. But I think you should reconsider. Right now, the story is being told by people who don't understand financial fraud, who are treating this as tabloid entertainment. You have expertise that could help others recognize these schemes. You could control the narrative instead of letting it control you. He had a point. I'd spent enough time watching fraud cases play out in media to know that the first narrative to take hold was usually the one that stuck. Better to tell my own story accurately than have it told by reporters who didn't understand forensic accounting or identity theft. One interview, I said. On my terms. I want to review questions beforehand, and I won't discuss personal details about my marriage beyond what's already public. Agreed. When are you available? We scheduled it for the following week. After I hung up, Lauren appeared in the kitchen doorway. That was smart, she said. Control the story before it controls you. That's what I figured. I stood up, forcing my legs to be steady. Is Julian still here? Upstairs packing. FBI arranged for him to stay in protective custody until the trial. Too many reporters figured out where you live. They're camped outside. I walked to the front window and pulled back the curtain slightly. Sure enough, 3 news vans sat parked across the street. Reporters with cameras stood on the sidewalk, waiting for someone to emerge. Great, I muttered. How am I supposed to leave my own house? FBI's sending a car around back in 20 minutes. They'll take Julian to a secure location. You should probably go with them, stay somewhere else for a few days until this dies down. This is my home, Lauren. I'm not letting reporters chase me out of it. She gave me a look that said I was being stubborn, but she didn't argue. Your choice. But you're not going to have privacy for a while. This story has everything media loves. Wealth, deception, international intrigue. A smart woman who outsmarted an elaborate con. You're going to be famous whether you want to be or not. Famous. The word felt foreign and unwelcome. I'd spent my entire career working behind the scenes, building cases that other people presented in court, finding evidence that prosecutors used to convict criminals. I'd never wanted attention. I'd wanted to do good work and go home at the end of the day. Now my face was on national news, my story was being discussed by people who'd never met me, and my privacy had evaporated like morning fog. The interview with Patricia Hamilton aired the following Thursday. She'd kept her promise. Intelligent questions about forensic accounting techniques, red flags in financial behavior, the psychological impact of discovering long-term deception. No sensationalism. No tabloid angles. Just a thoughtful conversation about fraud, identity theft, and the sophisticated schemes criminals use to exploit trust. My phone exploded afterward. Messages from former colleagues congratulating me on the interview. Friends from college reaching out after years of silence. Distant relatives I barely remembered sending support. But the messages that mattered most came from strangers. Women who'd seen the interview and recognized their own situations in my story. My husband has been acting strange for months. Small things that don't add up. Your interview made me realize I'm not crazy for noticing. I thought I was paranoid, but after hearing you talk about red flags, I checked our credit cards. There are charges I can't explain. Thank you for showing that it's okay to trust your instincts. Thank you for proving that noticing inconsistencies isn't being suspicious. It's being smart. I read these messages late at night in my home office, and something shifted in my understanding of what had happened. My trauma wasn't just mine. It was a blueprint that others could use to recognize their own situations, to trust themselves when something felt wrong. 3 weeks after Reese's arrest, my doorbell rang at 8 p.m. I checked the security camera. Sienna stood on my front porch holding Thai food containers and a bottle of wine. I let her in, grateful for the familiar face, the person who'd started all this with one phone call that felt like it had happened years ago instead of weeks. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd built the trap, where I'd confronted Julian, where so many pieces of this nightmare had unfolded. Sienna unpacked food in silence, her movements careful and deliberate. For a while we just ate. The comfortable silence of people who'd known each other their entire lives, who didn't need words to fill space. Then Sienna started crying. I'd never seen her cry. Not when her engagement fell apart 5 years ago. Not when she'd been in a plane accident that nearly killed her. Not at family funerals or during personal crises. Sienna was the tough one, the steady one, the person who held everyone else together. I'm so sorry, she said, her voice breaking. Dane, I'm so sorry. For what? You saved me. That phone call. I should have called you months ago. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, mascara smearing. 6 months ago I saw him at O'Hare. He was boarding a flight to Miami with a woman who wasn't you. I convinced myself there was an innocent explanation. That maybe it was a colleague. That I was seeing things. My chest tightened. You saw them together? Not just together. Intimate. The way he touched her lower back when they walked. The way she leaned into him. I knew something was wrong and I didn't call you because I didn't want to interfere in your marriage. I didn't want to be the person who caused problems based on a suspicion. She looked up at me, her face wrecked with guilt. And then 3 months ago we were at that family dinner and you mentioned something about your finances. About how Reese was so good at managing investments. I'd seen his credit card charges on a passenger manifest 2 weeks earlier. Luxury hotels in places he'd never mentioned traveling to. I knew Dane. Some part of me knew he was lying to you, and I stayed silent because I didn't want to deal with the mess of speaking up. I reached across the table and grabbed her hand. Sienna, listen to me. That phone call you made, that impossible, crazy-sounding phone call, saved everything. My assets. My future. My sanity. If you called me 6 months ago with a suspicion, I might not have believed you. I would have made excuses. But you called me when you had proof, when the lie was so impossible to explain away that I had to face it. You didn't fail me. You saved me. But you lived with that imposter for months. You went through months of... I survived. I cut her off. I'm still here. And I'm going to use what happened to help other people. That's because of you. Your phone call started everything. We both cried then. The ugly, cathartic kind of crying that comes from releasing guilt and fear and trauma that had been building for weeks. When we finally stopped, Sienna opened the wine and we drank straight from the bottle, too exhausted for glasses. What happens now? She asked. I don't know. The trial won't be for months. Reese is fighting extradition from Dubai. My lawyer says it's a losing battle, but it'll drag out the process. In the meantime, I gestured vaguely at my kitchen, at my life, at the ruins of everything I'd thought was real. I figure out how to move forward. You could sell the brownstone. Start fresh somewhere else. I'd thought about it. But something in me rebelled against the idea of letting Reese's betrayal chase me out of the home I'd made, the neighborhood I loved, the life I'd built. No, I said. This is my home. He doesn't get to take that too. Sienna smiled, tired and sad but genuine. There's the Dane I know. Stubborn as hell. She stayed the night in my guest room, and having someone else in the house made it feel less haunted, less like a crime scene I was living in. The next morning I woke up to 17 new voicemails. Messages from women asking if I took clients, if I could help them investigate suspicious behavior, if I offered consulting services for people who suspected fraud in their own marriages. I sat on the edge of my bed listening to these strangers tell pieces of their stories, and realized I'd accidentally created a demand for expertise I'd never thought to offer professionally. By the time I got my first official client 6 weeks after Reese's arrest, I'd already leased office space in a building overlooking Lake Michigan and ordered business cards that read, Dane Holloway Consulting, Identity Verification and Asset Protection Specialists. Lauren agreed to partner with me, bringing her FBI background and security expertise. We developed screening protocols combining facial biometrics, financial forensics, behavioral analysis, and digital footprint tracking. My first client was named Patricia, a corporate lawyer from Boston who suspected her husband had been hiring lookalikes to maintain alibis while he traveled for work that didn't quite add up. It took me 3 weeks to prove she was right. 3 weeks of following money trails, analyzing travel patterns, conducting surveillance with Lauren's help. When I handed Patricia the evidence folder, photographs, financial records, testimony from the actor her husband had hired, she cried. Not from sadness but from relief. I thought I was losing my mind, she said, her voice shaking. Everyone told me I was paranoid, that I was creating problems where none existed. My therapist suggested I might have anxiety issues. You weren't paranoid, I told her. You were paying attention. Trust that. That moment crystallized everything. My purpose wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about helping women trust themselves when everyone told them they were wrong, when reality was being edited and they were the only ones who noticed the seams. Reese had tried to make me a victim. Instead, he'd accidentally given me a mission. And I was just getting started. My consulting business grew faster than I'd anticipated. Within 3 months, I had a waiting list of clients and had hired 2 additional investigators. Both women with backgrounds in financial forensics and law enforcement who understood the unique dynamics of investigating people you'd once trusted completely. But everything stopped when the call came from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Reese's extradition had finally been approved. He'd be arriving in Chicago within the week for arraignment. I'd known this day was coming. I'd prepared for it, mentally rehearsed how I'd feel, what I'd say if reporters asked for comment. But knowing something intellectually and experiencing it emotionally were entirely different things. The day they brought him back, I couldn't help myself. I pulled up the news coverage on my office computer, watching the live footage of O'Hare Airport. There he was. Reese Chandler. My husband. The man I'd shared a bed with for 7 years. The man who'd held me while I cried at my father's funeral. The man who'd hired an actor to replace himself so he could steal everything we'd built together. He wore an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed in front of him, flanked by federal marshals who looked like they weren't taking any chances. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions he didn't answer. His hair was badly cut, prison barbershop work. His face looked thinner, older, the confidence I remembered stripped away by 3 months in Dubai custody. Our eyes met through the camera lens. Impossible, I knew, but it felt real for just a moment. Then he was gone, hustled into a waiting vehicle, and the footage cut to an anchor discussing the upcoming trial. Lauren appeared in my office doorway. "You okay?" "I don't know," I said honestly. Part of me expected to feel something seeing him. Bigger. Satisfaction. Something. But I just feel empty. That's normal. The anger comes in waves. So does the grief. They'll both hit you when you least expect it. He was right. That night, alone in my brownstone, I found myself crying over a coffee mug. The stupid navy blue mug that Julian had used, that Reese had used before him, that now sat in my cabinet like an artifact from an archaeological dig of my former life. I threw it against the kitchen wall. It shattered with a satisfying crash, ceramic shards scattering across the floor. Then I sat down and cried harder because destroying a mug didn't actually make anything better. The arraignment was scheduled for Monday morning. I wasn't required to attend, but I wanted to. Needed to. I needed to see him in that courtroom, needed to watch him answer to charges that I'd helped build. I wore my best suit, the charcoal gray one I saved for important depositions. Professional armor. I walked into that federal courthouse with my head high, flanked by Lauren on one side and the lead prosecutor, Susan Blackwell, on the other. The courtroom was packed. Media in the back rows. Reese's business partners, probably trying to distance themselves from the scandal. His mother Helen looking diminished and gray. His brother Marcus, who wouldn't meet my eyes. And then Reese was let in. He wore a cheap suit, probably provided by his public defender since all his assets were frozen. His hair was still badly cut. His hands were folded on the defense table in that same gesture I'd seen 1,000 times. Fingers interlaced, thumbs pressed together. When his eyes found mine across the courtroom, I saw him flinch. Chilly flinch. Like seeing me was a physical blow. Good. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Margaret Reeves, read the charges in a voice that echoed through the silent courtroom. 18 counts. Identity theft. Wire fraud. Money laundering. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Embezzlement. Each count carried years of potential prison time. Reese's attorney, a sharp-dressed man named Richard Montgomery who looked like he charged $1,000 an hour, entered a plea of not guilty. I almost laughed. The evidence against Reese could fill a warehouse. His not guilty plea was theater, a formality before the inevitable. The trial began 4 months later. 4 months of preparation, of reviewing evidence, of meeting with prosecutors, of steeling myself for what was coming. My testimony was scheduled for day 7. A Tuesday morning in late spring, unseasonably warm, the kind of day that should have been beautiful if I wasn't about to sit in a witness box and recount the worst betrayal of my life. Susan Blackwell walked me through everything. Sienna's phone call. The discovery of Julian. The financial forensics. The offshore accounts. The fake investment opportunity that had triggered Reese's arrest. My voice stayed steady throughout. Professional. Factual. The same tone I'd used in hundreds of fraud investigations. This was just another case. Just another criminal being held accountable for theft. Except it wasn't. And when I glanced at Reese during my testimony, when I saw him sitting there looking small and defeated, something in my chest twisted painfully. I'd loved that man. Built a life with him. Trusted him completely. And he'd thrown it all away for money and a woman who'd turned state's witness the moment she realized she was going to prison. Richard Montgomery's cross-examination was exactly what Susan had prepared me for. He painted me as vindictive, jealous, a woman scorned who'd manufactured evidence out of spite. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Chandler," he said, his voice smooth and condescending, "that you and your husband had been experiencing marital difficulties for years? That you resented his success, his family connections, his professional achievements?" "No," I said calmly. "That's not true. Isn't it possible that when you discovered his relationship with Ms. Ashford, you decided to retaliate by framing him for financial crimes? That you used your expertise as a forensic accountant to manufacture evidence?" "No. The evidence isn't manufactured. Every transfer is documented. Every email is authenticated. Every piece of financial data can be verified by independent auditors. But you're the one who discovered this evidence. You're the one who conducted the investigation. How convenient that everything points to your husband's guilt when you're the one who—" "Your client hired an actor to replace himself," I interrupted, my voice sharp now. "He paid for extensive cosmetic surgery to make that actor look exactly like him. He lived in my house, sleeping in my bed, eating at my table for 4 months while your client stole money and planned his escape. I didn't manufacture that. I documented it. There's a difference." Montgomery tried a few more angles, but Susan had prepared me well. Every attack was deflected with documentation, with timestamps, with evidence that couldn't be explained away. When I finally stepped down from the witness box, I felt drained but intact. I'd survived the worst of it. Then Claire took the stand. I hadn't expected to feel anything watching her testify. She'd been complicit in everything, had helped Reese plan his exit, had known about the stolen money, had been waiting in Dubai to start their new life with assets taken from me. But watching her now, I felt an unexpected pang of something like pity. She looked nothing like the confident woman from Sienna's photos. Prison orange had replaced designer clothes. Her red hair hung limp and unwashed. Her face was pale, makeup-free, showing every line that stress and regret had carved. "Tell the court how you met the defendant," Susan prompted. Claire's voice was small, hesitant. "At a charity fundraiser in New York. About 18 months ago. He approached me at the bar. He was charming. Kind of. He said he was separated from his wife, but she was making the divorce difficult." "What did he tell you about his wife?" "That she was vindictive. That she wanted to take everything in the divorce just to punish him for wanting to leave. That he was trapped in a marriage that had been dead for years." Claire's voice cracked. "I believed him. I believed everything he said." Susan walked her through the rest. How Reese had courted her for months. How he'd promised they could be together once he'd protected his assets from his greedy wife. How he'd convinced her to quit her job and sell her apartment to prepare for their new life together. "I gave up everything," Claire said, tears streaming down her face now. "My career. My apartment. My relationship with my family. He promised me we'd start fresh in the Maldives. That we'd finally be free. I didn't know the money was stolen. I didn't know he'd hired someone to replace him. I thought," her voice broke completely, "I thought he loved me." The defense attorney tried to discredit her, suggested she was lying to reduce her own sentence. But the email records supported every word. The communications between Reese and Claire, spanning 18 months, discussing the plan in explicit detail. What struck me most was watching Reese's face during her testimony. He looked betrayed. Actually betrayed. As if he couldn't believe Claire would turn on him, would cooperate with prosecutors, would choose her own survival over their supposed love. The irony was so thick I could taste it. During the lunch recess, I encountered Claire in the hallway outside the courtroom. We stood there for a moment, two women whose lives had been demolished by the same man, neither of us sure what to say. "I'm sorry," she finally whispered. "For all of it. I know that doesn't change anything, but I am." I studied her face, looking for lies, for manipulation. But I only saw exhaustion and genuine remorse. "You gave up everything for him," I said quietly. "So did I. The difference is, I chose to save myself instead of going down with him." She nodded, fresh tears spilling over. "I wish I'd been that strong." A bailiff called us back to the courtroom before I could respond. We walked in opposite directions. Her to the witness room, me to the gallery, and I never spoke to her again. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. I sat in that courtroom with Sienna and Lauren on either side of me, all of us silent with anticipation. When the jury finally filed back in, I tried to read their faces, looking for hints of their decision. But they were carefully neutral, trained not to reveal anything before the official announcement. The foreman stood. On count 1 identity theft, we find the defendant guilty. Sienna's hand found mine, squeezing hard. On count 2 wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. 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 18 counts. 18 guilty verdicts. Reese's face went blank. Complete shock. Like some part of him had believed his expensive attorney would save him, that his charm would work on the jury the way it had worked on everyone else his entire life. His mother cried out, a sound of pure anguish. Marcus put his head in his hands. The judge announced she'd review sentencing guidelines and make her determination in 2 weeks. Marshals moved forward to take Reese back into custody. As they led him past my row, he turned to look at me one last time. I expected to feel triumph. Victory. Satisfaction that justice had been served. That I just felt tired. Hollowed out. Like I'd won a battle but lost something I couldn't quite name in the process. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Cameras. Microphones. Shouted questions. Mrs. Chandler, how do you feel about the verdict? Do you think justice was served? What's next for you? I gave a brief prepared statement thanking the prosecutors and the jury, then Lauren hustled me into her car before the questions could continue. That night, I sat alone in my brownstone, the place that had been a crime scene, a trap, a battlefield, and let myself cry for the first time since everything began. Not for Reese. Not for the marriage I'd lost. But for the version of myself who'd existed before Sienna's phone call. The woman who'd trusted completely. Who'd believed in permanence and partnership and the vows we'd made. That woman was gone. And no verdict, no matter how satisfying, could bring her back. The morning after the verdict, I woke up in my brownstone and realized I had no idea what to do next. 4 months, everything had been focused on the trial. Preparing testimony. Reviewing evidence. Meeting with prosecutors. Building the case that would put Reese away. The trial had given me purpose, direction, a clear enemy to fight. Now that fight was over. And I was left sitting in a house full of memories I didn't want, married to a man who'd be in prison for over a decade, with a life that needed rebuilding from rubble. I made coffee. Sat at my kitchen table. Stared at the wall. My phone rang. A client. A woman from Atlanta whose husband had been moving money in suspicious patterns. She needed an update on her case. Work. I could do work. Work made sense. Work had rules and procedures and outcomes I could control. I spent the next 2 weeks diving into my consulting business with the kind of obsessive focus that probably wasn't healthy but kept me functional. My waiting list had grown to 47 women. Lauren and I were conducting investigations in 6 states simultaneously. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in mid-June. I almost didn't go. The verdict was already in. What did it matter what sentence the judge imposed? But Sienna convinced me. You need to see it through to the end, she said. Otherwise, this will stay unfinished in your head forever. Trust me. So I went. The courtroom was less packed than it had been for the verdict. Media presence was lighter. The sensational part of the story was over. Now it was just the administrative conclusion. Reese looked different again. Prison had continued its work on him. He'd lost more weight. His cheap suit hung loose on his frame. His hair was graying at the temples in a way it hadn't been 6 months ago. The judge, Margaret Reeves, stern and uncompromising, reviewed the case one final time. She recounted the financial damage. $6.2 million when all victims were tallied. The calculated nature of the crimes. The multiple people whose lives had been devastated. Then she gave Reese 15 minutes to make a statement. He stood slowly, hands clasped in front of him. For just a moment I thought maybe he'd finally break. Maybe he'd apologize. Take real responsibility. Show genuine remorse. Your Honor, he began, his voice shaking slightly. I want to explain the circumstances that led to these unfortunate events. The pressure I was under professionally, the mistakes in judgment I made during a difficult period, the way situations spiraled beyond my control. I stopped listening. He was doing it again. Deflecting. Reframing. Making himself the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of deliberate crimes. He talked for 12 minutes. He mentioned stress 7 times. He referenced poor decisions, and unfortunate circumstances, and situations that escalated. He talked about his family, his previous contributions to his community, his clean record before all this. He never once apologized to me. Never looked in my direction. Never took actual responsibility for hiring an actor to replace himself, for stealing millions, for destroying everyone who'd trusted him. When he finished, the judge's expression hadn't changed. "Mr. Chandler," she said, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade. "I've presided over financial fraud cases for 23 years. I've heard every justification, every excuse, every attempt to reframe deliberate crimes as unfortunate circumstances. What you did was not the result of stress or poor judgment. It was a calculated, sophisticated scheme to defraud multiple victims while maintaining a facade of normalcy. You hired an actor. You paid for extensive cosmetic surgery. You systematically moved assets offshore while your imposter maintained your domestic life. This required planning, resources, and sustained effort over many months." He paused, letting that sink in. "The victims of your crimes include your wife, your business partners, your clients, even your own mother whose trust fund you plundered. The total financial damage exceeds $6 million. The psychological damage is incalculable." Another pause. "Taking into account the severity of the crimes, the number of victims, the calculated nature of your actions, and your complete lack of genuine remorse, I sentence you to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. You will also be required to make full restitution to all victims." Helen Chandler cried out, a sound of pure anguish. Marcus sat with his head in his hands. 12 years. Reese would be 58 when he got out. His prime years gone. His reputation destroyed. His future a blank space. As marshals moved forward to take him back into custody, Reese finally looked at me. Really looked at me. I saw fear in his eyes. And something else. Maybe the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him through this entire process. Regret. Not for what he'd done to me, but for getting caught. For underestimating me. For believing I'd never figure it out. I held his gaze steadily until the marshals led him away. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked for comments. I gave a brief statement. Justice has been served. I'm grateful to the prosecutors, the jury, and Judge Reeves. Now I'm focused on moving forward and helping others who find themselves in similar situations. Professional. Composed. Giving them nothing they could sensationalize. As I walked to Lauren's car, my phone buzzed with a text from Julian. He'd been following the trial from Los Angeles, where he was now teaching ethics courses at an acting conservatory. 12 years. That's justice. How are you holding up? I typed back. One day at a time. His response came quickly. That's all any of us can do. Proud of you. Strange that the person who'd been paid to deceive me had become someone I could almost call a friend. Trauma created unlikely connections. 6 months after sentencing, my business had grown beyond anything I'd anticipated. The media coverage had positioned me as an expert in marriage fraud and identity theft. Women from across the country were reaching out. Some with legitimate concerns, some with paranoia that needed addressing, all of them deserving of respect and careful investigation. I hired 2 more investigators. Moved to a larger office suite overlooking Lake Michigan. Developed proprietary software for tracking digital footprints and financial patterns. Created training programs for other investigators who wanted to specialize in this field. But the most rewarding part wasn't the business metrics. It was the moment when I'd hand a client an evidence folder and watch relief wash over their face. Relief that they weren't crazy, that their instincts had been correct, that the inconsistencies they'd noticed were real. "Thank you for believing me," a woman named Sarah told me after I'd documented her husband's elaborate alibi fraud scheme. "Everyone told me I was paranoid. My therapist suggested I had trust issues. You're the first person who took me seriously. That was the work that mattered. Helping women trust themselves when everyone else told them they were wrong." A year after the trial, Helen Chandler showed up at my office unannounced. I almost had my assistant turn her away. But curiosity won out. What could she possibly want? She sat across from my desk looking smaller, older, diminished by the weight of everything that had happened. Her pearls were gone. Her perfectly styled hair was simpler now. She looked like a woman who'd had to rebuild her own identity after watching her son's mask slip. "I owe you an apology," she said without preamble. "A real one. Not the performative kind I gave at the trial." I waited, giving her nothing. I spent 7 years making you feel like you weren't good enough for my son. I criticized your career, your clothes, your decision not to have children immediately. I treated you like a temporary fixture in Reese's life rather than his partner. She paused, her voice breaking slightly. I was wrong. About everything. You were the best thing that ever happened to him and I was too blind to see it. What changed? I asked, my voice neutral. I visited him in prison once. 3 months after sentencing. I thought, she swallowed hard. I thought I'd see my son. The boy I raised. The man I believed him to be. But all I saw was a stranger. Manipulative. Self-pitying. Incapable of taking responsibility. He spent the entire visit complaining about prison conditions and blaming everyone but himself. His lawyer. The judge. Even me for not providing better character testimony. She looked directly at me for the first time. That's when I realized I never really knew him. I knew the version he wanted me to see. The performance. Just like you lived with a performance for 4 months without knowing it. We were both deceived. The difference is you were smart enough to figure it out. Her apology was more honest than anything else the Chandler family had offered. It didn't erase years of subtle cruelty, but it mattered. Thank you for saying that, I said. I appreciate it. We talked for another hour. She asked about my business. I told her about the women I was helping. She asked if I'd ever consider forgiving Reese. I told her forgiveness wasn't the goal. Moving forward was. When she left, she asked one more question. Would you ever consider visiting him? Not for his sake. For yours. To see what he's become. No, I said without hesitation. I don't need closure from Reese. I found it without him. She nodded, understanding. You're stronger than any of us ever gave you credit for. 2 years after Sienna's phone call, the call that split my world in two, I stood in my office on a Tuesday morning, preparing for a new client consultation. Rebecca Young arrived at 9 o'clock sharp. Tech executive, early 40s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of controlled anxiety I recognized from my own mirror 2 years ago. Tell me everything, I said, pulling out my notepad. She took a shaky breath. 3 months ago, my business partner saw my husband at a restaurant in New York. But he was supposed to be in Seattle with me that weekend. When I asked him about it, he had an explanation that seemed reasonable. But then it happened again. Different city. Different circumstances. Same impossible situation. I was already building the investigation framework in my mind. Timeline analysis. Financial forensics. Digital footprint tracking. The familiar patterns I'd learned to recognize. Has he been traveling more than usual? I asked. Yes. Almost every week now. Always for work. Always with receipts and conference schedules and reasonable explanations. And something feels wrong. Everything feels wrong, she said, her voice breaking. But I can't prove it. Everyone tells me I'm paranoid. That successful marriages require trust. That I'm creating problems where none exist. I knew that feeling. The gaslighting that came from trusting your instincts while everyone else told you were imagining things. Rebecca, I said firmly. Your instincts are telling you something's wrong because something is wrong. Healthy relationships don't create this kind of persistent unease. We're going to investigate. We're going to find the truth. And whatever that truth is, you're going to be able to handle it. Because knowing is always better than living in uncertainty. Her eyes filled with tears. Thank you. You have no idea how much I needed to hear that. But I did know. I knew exactly how much she needed validation. How desperately she needed someone to take her seriously. This was what I did now. This was who I'd become. Not the naive woman who'd trusted completely. Not the victim of an elaborate con. But someone who'd survived betrayal and turned that survival into purpose. Reese had tried to erase me. Replace me. Steal everything I'd built. Instead, he'd accidentally created something far more dangerous than he'd ever anticipated. A woman who understood exactly how fraud worked, who could spot deception in its earliest stages, who knew how to document evidence that would hold up in any court. He'd wanted to make me a victim. He'd made me a weapon. And every day I used that weapon to help women protect themselves from men who thought they were too smart to get caught. Outside my office window, Lake Michigan stretched toward the horizon, vast and cold and beautiful. I'd survived my own drowning in those waters. Now I pulled others from the depths before they went under completely. Reese was in prison. Claire was in prison. Julian was teaching ethics. The Chandler family was rebuilding their reputation one apology at a time. And I was here in my office overlooking the lake, helping Rebecca and all the women who would come after her. Not for revenge. Not for vindication. But because I'd learned the most important lesson of all. The best response to betrayal isn't destruction. It's transformation. And I'd transformed into someone stronger than the woman I'd been, more capable than the victim Reese had tried to create, more purposeful than I'd ever been in my comfortable marriage. He'd taken my trust, my marriage, my sense of security, but he'd accidentally given me something more valuable. The knowledge that I could survive anything, the skills to help others do the same, and the understanding that real strength comes not from never being broken, but from rebuilding yourself into something better than what you were before. That was the victory he'd never understand. And as I listened to Rebecca's story and began building her investigation, I felt something I hadn't felt in 2 years. Not closure. Not peace. Not happiness. But purpose. Real, earned, hard-won purpose. And that was enough. If this story of calculated justice kept you hooked until the very end, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Dane served shrimp scampi to the imposter, watching him eat the meal that should have killed the real Reese. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more gripping stories of betrayal and revenge. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.